she was never meant to be the center of the Marvel Universe. While her sisters built a childhood empire of straight-to-video hits, Elizabeth Olsen quietly slipped into tiny festival movies, the kind shot on shoestring budgets and projected in midnight slots at Sundance. Critics called her the next great indie actress, not the future emotional core of the world's biggest franchise. But then came Wanda Maximoff, a haunted young woman with powers she could barely control, a refugee whose grief became more dangerous than any villain. Over the next decade, Elizabeth would turn the Scarlet Witch from a side character in the end credits into the most heartbreaking figure in the entire MCU. WandaVision shattered expectations with its surreal sitcom grief spiral, while Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness twisted her into a tragic monster audiences couldn't stop sympathizing with. This is not just the story of a superhero. It's the story of an actress who turned pain into power and paid a price for it every time the cameras rolled. Long before red chaos magic lit up an MCU sky, Elizabeth Chase Olsen grew up in the shadow of a global brand. Born in 1,989 inches, Sherman Oaks, California, she watched Mary-Kate and Ashley turn their childhood into an empire of TV movies, merchandise, and tabloid headlines. The Olsen twins belonged to the public. Elizabeth belonged to the quiet spaces in between school hallways, acting classes, regional theater. By 10, she already knew she wanted to act, but she also knew she did not want to become the third Olsen sister product line. So she stepped away from the family spotlight, focusing on training instead of fame, choosing rehearsals and auditions over red carpets and magazine covers. When she finally stepped onto the world stage, it wasn't through a studio tentpole, but through a painfully small, brutally intimate movie. In 2011, she made her film debut in the psychological indie thriller Martha Marcy May Marlene, the story of a young woman escaping a cult and sinking into paranoia and trauma. The film premiered at Sundance, and critics immediately locked onto her performance raw, fragile, and terrifyingly controlled. Reviews singled her out as a revelation, and the awards conversation followed. She earned nominations for Best Actress from major critics groups and the Independent Spirit Awards, while the film itself became a festival darling. She soon added a BAFTA Rising Star nomination, confirmation that the industry saw her as more than just another famous last name. For an actress who had spent her childhood watching other people's fame from the sidelines, it was a violent kind of arrival, not with glitter, but with panic attacks, fragmented memories, and whispered dialogue in dimly lit rooms. Over the next few years, Elizabeth built a resume that felt almost anti-Hollywood in its choices. She was the quietly unraveling lead in the minimalist horror film Silent House, earning praise even when the movie divided audiences. She drifted through campus romance in liberal arts, tangled herself in paranormal thriller territory with red lights, then kept returning to characters who seemed to be breaking apart from the inside. Casting directors and critics began to see a pattern. Elizabeth Olsen was very good at playing women who were trying and failing to hold their lives together. She wasn't the glamorous Olsen, or the tabloid Olsen. She was the one chasing the hardest emotions on screen. Hollywood studios eventually came calling, but even then, she entered on the edges. In 2014, she appeared in Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, a massive monster movie built on scale and spectacle, rather than intimate close-ups. Yet, even surrounded by collapsing skyscrapers and military hardware, her instinct stayed the same: find the human cost. Her character wasn't the hero or the villain. She was the person waiting at home, the one whose life would be shattered if the hero failed. It was a recurring theme in her early work, a woman defined by the fallout of someone else's choices. By the time Marvel truly took notice, Elizabeth had carved out a reputation as an actor's actor, beloved by festival programmers and critics, but not yet a household name. She was known for Sundance, for difficult women, for grief and anxiety, and quiet implosions. She was not, on paper, the obvious choice to join a multi-billion-dollar superhero franchise dominated by charisma, quips, and toy-ready costumes. But Marvel was looking for something more complicated with Wanda Maximoff, a character who felt like a refugee from a more serious drama dropped into a comic book war. Before her superhero opportunity fully arrived, Olsen had already tasted the emotional weight of television as well. On the series Sorry for Your Loss, she played a young widow navigating grief in slow motion, long before WandaVision turned loss into a suburban hex. The show didn't dominate ratings, but it deepened her reputation in Hollywood as someone who could sustain ache across hours, not just in a single 2-hour film. Casting her as Wanda wasn't just a stunt. It was a calculated bet that one actress could carry the emotional burden of an entire universe's trauma. When she finally stepped into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, first in a brief tease in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and then fully in Avengers, Age of Ultron, Elizabeth arrived as something unusual. An indie darling, walking into a machine built for global spectacle. She brought with her all the ghosts of cult compounds and shattered marriages and quiet panic attacks. The question was never whether she could handle the action. The real question was whether Marvel would let her bring that level of pain into their perfectly calibrated universe and what it would cost her and the character if they did. In those early Marvel appearances, Wanda Maximoff was powerful but peripheral. The strange young woman with a heavy Sokovian accent, a tragic backstory, and red energy crackling at her fingertips. She lost her parents to a Stark bomb, her brother Pietro in the battle against Ultron, and then, in the most devastating blow, her soulmate Vision in Avengers: Infinity War. Each loss was written into the scripts as a plot point, a reason for the next explosion or battle. But Elizabeth played them like open wounds that never fully healed. Even when she floated above the battlefield in Avengers: Endgame, tearing Thanos apart with raw fury, the performance wasn't just about power. It was about a woman who had finally found something to love, only to watch it ripped away twice, once when she killed Vision herself, and again when Thanos rewound time and murdered him in front of her. By 2019, the MCU was a juggernaut, and Wanda was still technically a supporting player. Yet fans online were already calling her the most powerful Avenger, circulating clips of her rage and heartbreak from movie to movie. Elizabeth Olsen, the girl who had once stepped away from her sister's fame, had quietly become the emotional fault line of the biggest franchise on Earth. All Marvel had to do was give her the space to break completely, and to ask what happens when grief is stronger than any Infinity Stone. When Marvel finally centered Wanda Maximoff, they didn't give her another ensemble film. They handed Elizabeth Olsen an entire reality to build and then to destroy. WandaVision, released on Disney Plus in 2021, took one of the MCU's most traumatized characters and dropped her into a warped television dreamscape. Each episode styled after a different era of American sitcom history. On paper, it sounded like a gamble. In practice, it became the show that proved Marvel could be formally daring and emotionally devastating at the same time. Olsen had to navigate that tightrope in real time. One week she was channeling 1,950 seconds, Lucille Ball-style physical comedy. The next, she was collapsing on a soundstage, screaming as Wanda's perfect suburban illusion shattered. Her performance fused technical precision with something far messier, the feeling of a woman using fantasy to outrun sorrow. Audiences and critics responded immediately. WandaVision became Marvel's most critically dissected series and earned 23 Primetime Emmy nominations, including Outstanding Limited Series and a lead actress nod for Olsen herself, the highest total for any limited series that year. Marvel, the indie darling from Sundance, was suddenly the face of prestige television inside a superhero costume. For Elizabeth, Wanda was never just about spectacle. Interviews around this time reveal how she kept returning to the same core idea: grief as a force that warps reality. The now-quoted line, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" became a viral cultural moment, but it only landed because she grounded Wanda's breakdown in something recognizably human: denial, bargaining, rage, and finally, a brutal acceptance that even magic cannot resurrect certain losses. She wasn't playing a witch who happened to be sad. She was playing a woman whose sadness had finally found a language powerful enough to reshape the world. Then came the turn. In 2022's Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, directed by Sam Raimi, Wanda stepped out of the spotlight as grieving heroine and into the role of primary antagonist. Marvel positioned her as the film's unstoppable force, a mother so consumed by the loss of her imaginary children that she was willing to tear holes in the multiverse to find versions of them who still existed. The movie exploded at the global box office, earning around $955.8 million worldwide and ranking among the highest-grossing films of the year. Playing that descent could have been simple. lean into horror, abandon sympathy. Elizabeth did the opposite. Even at Wanda's most terrifying, limping through reflections, covered in blood and debris, whispering apologies before killing, she kept anchoring the character in recognizable heartbreak. The audience wasn't watching a cackling villain. They were watching someone who had lost her family 3 times over and decided that morality was less important than the chance to hold them again. The power was spectacular. The pain underneath it was unbearable. On screen, Scarlet Witch became arguably the most dangerous being in the MCU. Off-screen, Elizabeth Olsen became something just as rare. The franchise's tragic center, the actor who proved that even inside a machine built on quips and explosions, the most destabilizing weapon of all could be unresolved grief. After WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, Elizabeth Olsen emerged from the MCU not just richer or more famous, but strangely redefined. For years, she had been the quiet Olsen, the serious one, the indie actress. Now she was the woman who had made millions of viewers cry through a black and white sitcom parody and then horrified them as she slaughtered sorcerers in a haunted temple. Her bankability increased, but more importantly, her cultural position shifted. She became the artist audiences trusted with their darkest feelings. Post-Wanda, Elizabeth leaned back into the kind of complicated roles that had first made her name. She deepened her exploration of bereavement on television with Sorry for Your Loss, then embodied real-life axe murder suspect Candy Montgomery in Love and Death, once again playing a woman whose interior life was messier than any headline could summarize. Critics pointed out the pattern. Olsen kept gravitating toward characters living at the edge of collapse, even when the projects had nothing to do with superheroes. At the same time, she remained notably absent from social media, cultivating a life that felt almost aggressively private compared to the relentless discourse around Wanda Maximoff. The industry took notice. Her WandaVision work earned her Primetime Emmy and Golden Globe nominations, formally confirming what critics had been saying since Sundance. Elizabeth Olsen was no longer just the Olsen sister who could act, but one of the defining performers of her generation, capable of carrying both experimental streaming television and nearly billion-dollar blockbusters on the strengths of her emotional honesty. Marvel, meanwhile, left Scarlet Witch's fate deliberately ambiguous. Buried under rubble at the end of Multiverse of Madness, Wanda appeared to die in a flash of red light, but the language around her in interviews was careful, full of never say never hints. Reports later surfaced that Olsen was not attached to upcoming Avengers films, at least for now, even as fan campaigns begged for her return. The character's future remained a question mark, frozen between martyrdom and resurrection. For Elizabeth, that uncertainty became a kind of freedom. She could step away from the Marvel machine and chase weirder, more intimate projects, again a fantasy romantic comedy here, a character-driven drama there, without permanently closing the door on the role that had changed her life. In profiles and interviews, she sounded remarkably grounded. Grateful for Wanda, wary of being consumed by her, determined to build a career that would outlast any franchise's lifespan. She had carried the weight of the MCU's grief for nearly a decade. Now, for the first time, she seemed to be choosing where to put her own. Looking ahead, Elizabeth Olsen stands at a crossroads that most franchise stars never reach. She has already left an indelible mark on global pop culture, yet her career still feels like it's just beginning. In recent interviews, she has spoken openly about wanting a long, varied life in film, the kind where she can move from a weird A24-style fantasy romance to a grounded FX drama without being chained forever to a superhero costume. Projects like the upcoming film Eternity, a romantic comedy set in the afterlife, and the series work she continues to develop suggest a future less dominated by capes and more by characters whose inner lives are messy, funny, and human. Her relationship with Marvel is equally unresolved. Officially, she is not currently slated to appear in the next wave of Avengers movies. Cashin slided off a doomer-officialed, Marvel's sense of meanest Avengers movies. And she has hinted that she's at peace with stepping away, even as she leaves the door cracked for a potential return if the story is worth telling. That ambiguity has become part of her legacy. Wanda Maximoff exists in a kind of quantum state within the MCU. Dead, and not quite dead, mourned by fans who still debate whether her final sacrifice was redemption or tragedy. If Marvel does bring her back, it will be because they recognize what audiences already know. The universe feels emotionally thinner without her. But even if Scarlet Witch never rises from the rubble, the impact of Elizabeth's performance is already permanent. She helped shift the superhero genre away from invincible stoicism and towards something far more vulnerable. Her Wanda was allowed to be angry, jealous, obsessive, and catastrophically wrong, and still deeply loved. In an era where blockbusters often flatten characters into archetypes, she insisted on playing a woman whose power and pain were inseparable, whose worst decisions came from the same place as her deepest love. That is the true legacy of the pain behind power. Elizabeth Olsen turned Wanda Maximoff into a mirror for anyone who has ever loved so fiercely that they didn't know what to do when that love lost its target. The fans' favorite line from WandaVision, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" echoes the idea at the heart of her work. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. On screen, that love tore the multiverse apart. Off screen, it built a career that may outlast every universe Marvel can imagine.